Some stories are so impossible that hospitals refuse to discuss them publicly. But if you're someone who believes that documented miracles aren't fairy tales, then what I'm about to share will shatter everything you thought you knew about the connection between forgiveness and physical healing. Grace Williams was staring at her death sentence, a medical report that gave her exactly 93 days to live. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer had spread to her brain like wildfire, and 3 different oncologists had delivered the same brutal verdict. There was nothing more they could do. But at 2:17 a.m. on a cold February night in Denver, Colorado, something happened that would make medical history. Grace was sitting at her kitchen table, writing what she thought would be her final letter, not to her family, not to her friends, but to the woman who had destroyed her life 15 years ago, Rebecca Martinez. The woman whose betrayal had cost Grace her marriage, her children's trust, and nearly her sanity. As Grace's pen moved across the paper, writing words of forgiveness she never thought she could speak, something extraordinary began happening inside her body. The first sign was warmth, a tingling sensation that started in her chest and spread through every cell like liquid light. Grace thought she was having another reaction to her chemotherapy, but this felt different. This felt like healing. By morning, the chronic pain that had plagued her for months was completely gone. When her oncologist saw her latest blood work 3 days later, he called an emergency meeting with the entire medical team. This is the kind of story that challenges everything we've been taught about the limits of human healing. If you're part of the growing community that understands reality is far more magical than mainstream medicine admits, you're going to want to follow this impossible journey with me. Because what Grace discovered about the power of forgiveness didn't just save her life. It's now being studied by researchers who are quietly revolutionizing how we understand the connection between emotional healing and physical miracles. The documented evidence I'm about to share with you includes medical records, testimonies from multiple witnesses, and healing protocols that are producing results doctors can't explain. This isn't about wishful thinking or positive affirmations. This is about measurable, verifiable transformations that are happening right now in hospitals and healing centers across America. Grace's story begins with betrayal so devastating it nearly broke her spirit, but ends with a healing so complete it's making medical professionals question everything they thought they knew about terminal illness. And it all started with 4 words she wrote in that letter at 2:17 a.m. "I choose to forgive you." The fluorescent lights in Dr. Harrison's office hummed with that sterile, institutional frequency that Grace Williams had grown to hate over the past 6 weeks. She sat in the burgundy leather chair that squeaked every time she shifted her weight, staring at the diplomas on the wall while her oncologist shuffled through her test results with the deliberate slowness of someone delivering terrible news. Grace had built a successful real estate career in Colorado Springs by reading people's faces, and Dr. Harrison's expression told her everything she needed to know before he even opened his mouth. The slight downward tilt of his eyebrows, the way he kept adjusting his glasses, the deep breath he took before speaking, the kind that doctors take when they're about to shatter someone's world. "Grace, I'm afraid the cancer has spread more aggressively than we anticipated," he said, his voice carrying that practiced gentleness that medical professionals use when delivering death sentences. "The tumors in your pancreas have doubled in size, and we've now found significant metastasis in your brain. Based on these scans and your current blood markers, we're looking at approximately 3 months, possibly less." The words hit her like a physical blow. But what struck Grace most wasn't the diagnosis itself. She'd been preparing for this possibility. It was the silence that followed. It's the absolute, crushing silence where the rest of her life should have been. 93 days. That's what 3 months translated to in her mind. 93 sunrises, 93 opportunities to say goodbye. 93 chances to make peace with a life that felt frustratingly incomplete. "What about treatment options?" she asked, though she could already see the answer in his eyes. "We can continue with palliative chemotherapy to manage your symptoms. But at this stage, we're focused on comfort rather than cure." "I'm sorry, Grace. I truly am. That evening, Grace sat in her empty house in the Broadmoor area, surrounded by the evidence of her successful life. Real estate awards lined the mantelpiece. Photos of sold properties covered her office walls. But success felt meaningless when measured against 93 days. She poured herself a glass of wine with hands that trembled slightly. Whether from the cancer or the shock, she wasn't sure. As she sat there in the growing darkness, her mind drifted to Rebecca Martinez for the first time in months. Grace had trained herself not to think about Rebecca, not to let that old wound bleed into her present life. But facing death had a way of bringing unfinished business to the surface. Rebecca, her former best friend, the woman who had systematically destroyed Grace's marriage by having an affair with her husband David while pretending to comfort Grace through their marital problems. The betrayal had happened 15 years ago, but the anger felt as fresh as yesterday. Rebecca had been Grace's maid of honor, the godmother to her children, the person she trusted most in the world. And when Grace's marriage started showing cracks, David working late, being distant, the usual signs, Rebecca had been there with wine and sympathy, encouraging Grace to give him space while she was secretly meeting him at hotels across town. Grace discovered the affair in the most cliched way possible. A text message on David's phone that he'd forgotten to delete. Last night was incredible. Grace will be at her sister's all weekend. Your place at 8. The message was from Rebecca's number. Grace still remembered the exact time she read it. 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon in October. The moment her entire world collapsed. Now, with death approaching, Grace found herself thinking about Rebecca with a clarity that surprised her. The anger was still there, burning like a low-grade fever in her chest. But there was something else now, a strange kind of urgency. As if her body was trying to tell her something her mind couldn't quite grasp. She walked to her home office and pulled out a box she hadn't opened in years. Inside were photos, letters, and mementos from her life before the divorce. There, near the bottom, was a picture from her wedding day. Grace and Rebecca, arms around each other, laughing at something David had just said. They looked so happy, so innocent, so completely unaware of the devastation that lay ahead. As Grace held the photograph, something extraordinary happened. A warmth spread through her chest, not the burning sensation she'd grown accustomed to from the tumors. But something different. Something that felt almost like forgiveness. The thought appeared in her mind unbidden and unwelcome. She had no intention of forgiving Rebecca Martinez. That woman had stolen her husband, broken up her family, and caused years of therapy for her children, who couldn't understand why mommy and daddy didn't love each other anymore. But the warmth in her chest intensified, spreading down her arms and up into her throat. For just a moment, the chronic pain that had become her constant companion seemed to ease. Grace set the photo down quickly, as if it had burned her fingers. She wasn't ready for forgiveness. She wasn't sure she'd ever be ready. That night, Grace lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing between thoughts of death and memories of betrayal. At some point around midnight, she must have dozed off, because she found herself in a vivid dream unlike anything she'd ever experienced. She was standing in a field of sunflowers under a sky so blue it seemed to pulse with life. Rebecca was there, but younger somehow, the way she'd looked in college when they first became friends. "I'm so sorry, Grace," Dream Rebecca said, and the words carried a weight that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than mere regret. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I was broken, and I broke everything I touched." Grace woke with tears on her cheeks and that same strange warmth in her chest. She glanced at her bedside clock, 2:17 a.m. As she lay there in the darkness, she became aware of something that made her heart stop. For the first time in months, she wasn't in pain. Not physical pain, anyway. The tumors that usually throbbed with every heartbeat were silent. The headaches that had plagued her for weeks were gone. She sat up slowly, almost afraid to move, waiting for the familiar waves of nausea and agony to crash over her. They didn't come. Grace touched her abdomen where the largest tumor was located, pressing gently. Nothing. No stabbing sensation, no burning, no pressure. just normal. Or what she vaguely remembered normal feeling like. Grace walked to her bathroom and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Something in her face looked different. The gray pallor that had settled over her skin seemed less pronounced. Her eyes, which had been dull and sunken for weeks, had a clarity she hadn't seen since before her diagnosis. As she stood there, studying this woman who looked like her but somehow more alive, Grace's phone buzzed with a text message. Her heart leaped. Who would text her at 2:20 a.m.? But when she looked at the screen, her blood ran cold. The message was from a number she hadn't seen in 15 years, but which was burned into her memory forever. Rebecca's number. The text contained just 4 words that would change everything. I dreamed about you. If you're still with me at this point, it means you're exactly the kind of person who understands that reality is far more magical than we've been taught. There's a growing community of us here who recognize that these aren't coincidences. They're miracles waiting to be acknowledged. Subscribe to this channel because what happens next in Grace's story is going to challenge everything you thought you knew about the connection between emotional healing and physical transformation. And trust me, you don't want to miss a single detail of how this impossible recovery unfolds. Grace stared at her phone screen until the words blurred together. I dreamed about you. For simple words from a woman she hadn't spoken to in 15 years, arriving at the exact moment her pain had mysteriously vanished. Her finger hovered over the delete button, the same way it had countless times over the years when Rebecca's name had appeared in her thoughts. But something stopped her. That same inexplicable warmth that had been spreading through her body since she'd looked at their wedding photo. Instead of deleting the message, Grace found herself typing back, "What kind of dream?" She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then immediately regretted it. The last thing she needed while facing terminal cancer was to reopen the wound that Rebecca Martinez had carved into her life. The response came within minutes. You were in a field of sunflowers, and you were dying. But then light started flowing out of your chest, and you began to heal. Grace, I know you have no reason to trust me, but I had to reach out. Something told me you needed to know. Grace's hands began trembling as she read the message. Rebecca had described her exact dream, the sunflowers, the healing light, everything. But that was impossible. People didn't share dreams, especially not people who hadn't communicated in over a decade. Yet here was the evidence glowing on her phone screen in Rebecca's unmistakable writing style. Unable to sleep, Grace made her way to the kitchen and brewed coffee with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. As the familiar ritual grounded her, memories of her friendship with Rebecca came flooding back. Not the bitter memories of betrayal, but the earlier ones. Rebecca teaching her to parallel park during senior year of high school. Rebecca holding her hand during her father's funeral. Rebecca staying up all night to help her study for the real estate licensing exam. They had been inseparable once, finishing each other's sentences and sharing dreams about their futures. Rebecca was going to be a teacher. Grace, a successful businesswoman, and they'd raised their children together like sisters. The plan had been so perfect, so full of promise, until David Morrison entered Grace's life during her junior year of college. David was charming, ambitious, and completely wrong for Grace in ways that everyone could see, except Grace herself. Rebecca had tried to warn her gently at first, pointing out David's wandering eye and his tendency to be dismissive when Grace talked about her career goals. But Grace was in love with the idea of being in love, and she interpreted Rebecca's concerns as jealousy. The wedding planning had created the first real crack in their friendship. David insisted on an elaborate ceremony that drained Grace's savings, while Rebecca quietly suggested they elope and save the money for a house. Grace chose David's vision over Rebecca's practical advice, and the distance between them began to grow. But it was after the wedding that things truly deteriorated. David's charm wore thin quickly in marriage. He criticized Grace's cooking, her housekeeping, her friends, especially Rebecca. "She's always had a thing for me, you know?" He'd tell Grace whenever Rebecca came over for their traditional Thursday night dinners. "It's kind of pathetic, the way she hangs around." Grace had defended Rebecca then, But David's poisonous words had taken root. When their marriage started crumbling 3 years later, David staying out late, being secretive about his phone, growing cold and distant, Grace had found herself confiding in Rebecca while simultaneously resenting her presence in their lives. Now, 15 years later, and facing death, Grace could see the situation with painful clarity. Rebecca hadn't set out to steal David. Rebecca had been trying to help Grace navigate her failing marriage while dealing with her own demons. Grace remembered now how Rebecca had changed during that period. Drinking more, dating inappropriate men, making increasingly self-destructive choices. "I was broken, and I broke everything I touched," Dream Rebecca had said, and for the first time. Grace wondered if those words contained more truth than excuse. As dawn broke over Colorado Springs, Grace made a decision that surprised even herself. She sat down at her computer and began typing. "Dear Rebecca, I don't know why I'm writing this. I'm dying 3 months, maybe less, according to my doctors. I have stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and it's spread to my brain. I should be writing letters to my children or planning my funeral, but instead, I find myself thinking about you. I've hated you for 15 years. I've nurtured that hatred like a garden, watering it with memories of your betrayal and fertilizing it with righteous anger. But hatred is exhausting, and I don't have the energy for it anymore. I'm not ready to forgive you. I may never be ready. But I'm tired of carrying this weight in my chest. Tired of letting your choices 15 years ago poison what little time I have left. You were my best friend once. You knew me better than anyone, including David. And despite everything that happened, I believe you loved me in your own broken way. I don't know what your dream means or why we both experienced the same impossible vision. I don't know why my pain disappeared the moment I thought about letting go of my anger toward you. But something is happening that I don't understand, and I think maybe I need to stop fighting it. This letter will probably sit in my drafts folder forever, because I'm too proud and too hurt to send it. But writing it feels like taking off a heavy coat I've been wearing for 15 years. For the first time in months, I can breathe." Grace, she read the letter 3 times, her finger hovering over the send button. Every rational part of her mind screamed against it. Rebecca didn't deserve her forgiveness. Rebecca had chosen her own selfish desires over their friendship, over Grace's marriage, over the welfare of Grace's children. Sending this letter would be a betrayal of her own justified anger. But as Grace sat there, she became aware of that warmth in her chest again, stronger now. And with it came something even more extraordinary: the complete absence of pain. The tumors that had been growing inside her for months felt quiet, still there, but dormant somehow, as if they were waiting for something. Without allowing herself to think about it further, Grace clicked send. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. Grace actually gasped as a wave of warmth flooded her entire body, starting from her heart and radiating outward through every cell. She felt lighter, as if she'd been carrying invisible chains that had suddenly fallen away. For a moment, she couldn't tell if she was crying or laughing, maybe both. Her phone rang exactly 7 minutes later. Rebecca's name appeared on the screen, and after a moment's hesitation, Grace answered. "Grace." Rebecca's voice was thick with tears. "Oh my God, Grace, I just got your letter. I can't believe. I knew you were sick from the dream, but I didn't realize. Are you okay?" "That's a stupid question. I know you're not okay, but I'm better than I've been in months," Grace interrupted and realized it was true. "Rebecca, that dream you had? I had the same one. Exactly the same. How is that possible?" "I don't know." Rebecca's voice dropped to a whisper. "Grace, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you 15 years ago, but I was too ashamed, too afraid. Can we meet, please? I know I have no right to ask, but yes." The word came out before Grace could stop it. "Yes, we can meet." They arranged to meet at a small coffee shop in downtown Denver the next afternoon. As Grace hung up the phone, she realized something that made her heart race. She had just agreed to see the woman she'd hated for 15 years, the woman who had destroyed her family. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she was actually looking forward to it. The Riverside Coffee Company in downtown Denver hadn't changed much in 15 years. The same mismatched furniture, the same local artwork covering exposed brick walls, the same smell of fresh ground espresso mixed with old wood. Grace arrived 10 minutes early and chose a corner table where she could see the entrance. A habit from her real estate days of always wanting to control the environment during difficult conversations. She almost didn't recognize Rebecca when she walked through the door. The confident, vibrant woman Grace remembered had been replaced by someone smaller, somehow more fragile. Rebecca's dark hair was shorter now, streaked with premature gray. And she moved with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to navigate the world as if it might collapse at any moment. But her eyes were the same, those deep brown eyes that had once sparkled with mischief and shared secrets. Rebecca spotted her immediately and approached with obvious nervousness, clutching a worn leather purse like a shield. "Grace," she said softly, "thank you for agreeing to meet. I wasn't sure you'd actually show up." "Neither was I," Grace admitted, gesturing to the chair across from her. "But here we are." They sat in awkward silence for a moment. To women whose lives had once been inseparably intertwined, now struggling to find common ground. Rebecca ordered herbal tea with shaking hands, and Grace noticed the slight tremor wasn't just from nerves. There was something else there, something that looked like ongoing struggle. Rebecca started, then stopped. "I'm sorry, I don't know how to do this. I've imagined this conversation 1,000 times. But now that we're here, you can say it," Grace said quietly. "I look sick. Because I am sick. Dying, actually." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "The cancer? Is it bad?" "Stage 4. Spread to my brain. 3 months, maybe less." Grace found it easier to deliver her death sentence matter-of-factly now, as if she were discussing someone else's prognosis. "But something strange has been happening since I got your text. The pain comes and goes now. Sometimes it disappears completely. Grace, I need to tell you something about that night. About David, and what really happened." Rebecca's voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been carrying this secret for 15 years, and it's been killing me. Literally killing me." Grace felt that familiar warmth beginning to build in her chest again. "What do you mean?" Rebecca took a shuddering breath. "I didn't seduce your husband, Grace. He didn't give me much choice in the matter." The words hung between them like a physical presence. Grace felt the blood drain from her face as the implication sank in. "What are you saying?" "David had been pursuing me for months before anything happened, okay? Making comments when you weren't around, finding excuses to be alone with me, telling me how unhappy he was in your marriage. I kept deflecting, kept trying to redirect his attention back to you, but he was persistent, and I was. God, Grace, I was such a mess back then." Rebecca's hands were trembling as she continued. "I'd been struggling with depression since college, drinking too much, making terrible decisions with men who treated me badly. My self-worth was non-existent. And David, he was your husband, this successful, charming man who seemed to have everything figured out. When he finally cornered me at that Christmas party at your house, you remember? You were upstairs putting the kids to bed. He didn't exactly take no for an answer." Grace felt the room spinning slightly. "Are you telling me that, David? That he forced you?" "Not physically. Not exactly. But he made it clear that if I wasn't willing, that he would tell you I had been trying to seduce him. That he would destroy our friendship either way. I was drunk. I was vulnerable. And I made the worst decision of my life. I thought if I went along with it once, maybe he'd leave me alone and forget about it." The warmth in Grace's chest was building to an almost unbearable intensity now, but it wasn't pleasant. It felt like pressure, like something trying to break free. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me hate you all these years?" "Because I was a coward," Rebecca said through her tears. "Because I was ashamed. Because part of me believed I deserved it. And because I thought you'd never believe me. David was so good at manipulating situations, at making himself look like the victim. Remember how he used to twist your words during arguments? How he'd make you question your own memory of events? Grace did remember. David's gaslighting had been subtle but persistent throughout their marriage. Small incidents where her recollection of events would somehow be wrong, where her emotional reactions would be labeled as overreactions or misunderstandings. She'd begun to doubt her own perceptions long before she discovered the affair. The worst part, Rebecca continued, is that it didn't stop after that first time. He had something on me then, a secret that could destroy our friendship. So it continued for months. I hated myself more with each encounter, started drinking heavily, dating men who treated me like garbage because I thought that's what I deserved. I was spiraling completely out of control. But you could have told me, Grace whispered. Though even as she said it, she wondered if that was true. Would she have believed Rebecca over David? Or would she have chosen to protect her marriage, her image of herself as a woman whose husband loved her? I tried to, Rebecca said. Remember that day in April when I asked if we could talk privately? You said David had warned you that I might try to cause trouble between you two, that I was jealous of your marriage. You said you hoped I could find my own happiness instead of trying to destroy yours. Grace felt as if she'd been physically struck. She did remember that conversation. David had indeed warned her that Rebecca was becoming increasingly unstable and might try to create drama. Grace had chosen to believe him. It actually felt proud of herself for being a loyal wife who wouldn't let anyone come between her and her marriage. When you found those text messages, Rebecca continued, I was actually trying to end things. That text about meeting at his place, I was going to tell him I couldn't do it anymore, that I was going to confess everything to you. But he had already planned for that possibility. He had photos, Grace, pictures he'd taken without my knowledge during some of our encounters. He threatened to show them to you, to make it look like I was a willing participant who was trying to steal your husband. The pressure in Grace's chest reached a breaking point, and she felt something inside her literally shift. It was as if a dam had burst, releasing 15 years of misdirected anger and betrayal. The warmth that had been building suddenly exploded through her entire body, bringing with it a clarity so sharp it was almost painful. Oh God, Grace whispered. Rebecca, what did he do to us? He destroyed us both, Rebecca said simply. And the worst part is that it worked perfectly. You hated me, I hated myself, and he got to be the victim whose marriage was ruined by his wife's unstable best friend. He even used the whole situation to get sympathy from other women during your divorce proceedings. They sat in silence for several minutes, both crying quietly as 15 years of misunderstanding crumbled between them. Grace felt as if she were seeing her entire marriage through new eyes. David's subtle manipulations, his need for control, his talent for making everyone around him doubt their own perceptions. I'm so sorry, Grace finally said. I'm so sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry I believed him instead of trusting my oldest friend. I'm sorry I let him use me as a weapon against you. You don't need to apologize, Rebecca said. You were being manipulated too. He was an expert at it. What happened to you after? During the divorce, after I cut you out of my life completely, Rebecca's smile was heartbreaking. I fell apart completely, lost my teaching job due to the drinking, ended up in rehab twice, spent years in therapy trying to rebuild some sense of self-worth. I've been sober for 8 years now, but the damage, some things you never fully recover from. As Rebecca spoke, Grace became aware that something extraordinary was happening in her body. The chronic fatigue that had plagued her for months was lifting like fog in sunlight. The persistent nausea that made eating a struggle had disappeared entirely. Most remarkably, the deep, gnawing pain from the tumors seemed to be dissolving with each truth that Rebecca revealed. Rebecca, Grace said suddenly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Have you been having other dreams about me? Dreams about healing. Rebecca's eyes widened. How did you know? Yes, for the past 2 weeks, almost every night. Dreams where light pours out of your body, where the darkness inside you transforms into something beautiful. Dreams where we're both young again, before everything went wrong. I've been having them too, Grace said. And each time I wake up from one of those dreams, I feel different. Better. Like something inside me is changing. They looked at each other across the small table, two women whose lives had been shaped by betrayal and secrets. And for the first time in 15 years, Grace felt genuinely hopeful about something other than simply surviving until tomorrow. There's something else, Rebecca said quietly. Something I've never told anyone. The night I had that first dream about you, I woke up and felt compelled to pray. I'm not even religious, Grace, but I found myself praying for your healing with an intensity that scared me. And while I was praying, I felt this presence, like something divine was listening, was actually responding. Grace reached across the table and took Rebecca's hand, the first physical contact they'd had in 15 years. The moment their skin touched, both women gasped. A jolt of energy passed between them, warm and electric and utterly inexplicable. Grace, Rebecca whispered, your hand is burning hot, but it doesn't hurt. It feels like healing energy. Grace looked down at their joined hands and saw something that made her heart race. Rebecca's hand, which had been shaking with nervous tremors since she'd arrived, was now perfectly steady. And her own hand, which should have been cold and weak from months of cancer treatment, seemed to be radiating a warmth that she could actually see, a faint golden glow that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. What's happening to us? Rebecca asked. Before Grace could answer, her phone buzzed with a call from Dr. Harrison's office. As she reached for it, she realized something that made her gasp out loud. For the first time in 4 months, she felt completely, utterly free of pain. Every tumor, every ache, every symptom of the cancer that was supposed to kill her in 90 days had simply vanished. I think, Grace said as she looked at Rebecca with wonder, we're about to find out. Dr. Harrison stared at the MRI images on his computer screen with the expression of a man whose understanding of reality had just been challenged. Grace sat across from his desk, no longer the pale, weakened woman who had received her death sentence 3 weeks ago. Her skin had color again. Her eyes were bright and alert, and most remarkably, she radiated an energy that seemed to fill the entire office. Grace, I've been an oncologist for 23 years, Dr. Harrison said slowly, and I've never seen anything like this. These scans were taken this morning, correct? Yes. This morning at 7 a.m., Grace confirmed, though she felt like she was watching someone else's life unfold. The brain tumor that we documented 3 weeks ago has shrunk by 68%. The pancreatic tumors show similar reduction. Your blood markers, CEA, CA 19 to 9. All the cancer indicators, they've dropped to levels I'd expect to see in a completely healthy person. He turned the monitor toward her, pointing at the before and after images. Grace, this doesn't happen. Not with pancreatic cancer, not at stage 4, and certainly not in 3 weeks without aggressive treatment. Grace studied the scans, seeing her own miracle displayed in clinical black and white. Where there had been dark masses 3 weeks ago, there were now only faint shadows. Her brain, which had been dotted with metastatic tumors, looked almost normal. What's your medical explanation for this? She asked. Dr. Harrison removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. I don't have one. I've consulted with colleagues at Johns Hopkins and MD Anderson. I've sent your scans to the best radiologists in the country. The consensus is that either our original scans were somehow flawed, which they weren't. I've triple-checked, or we're dealing with something that medical science doesn't currently understand. What do you mean by that? I mean that your body is doing something that should be impossible. Your immune system appears to be attacking the cancer cells with an efficiency and aggression we've never documented. It's as if every cell in your body suddenly remembered how to be healthy and decided to make it happen all at once. Grace thought about her last meeting with Rebecca 2 days ago. Their second coffee date since that first emotional encounter. Rebecca had looked healthier too. The tremor in her hands had completely disappeared. Her skin was clearer, and she moved with a confidence Grace hadn't seen since their college days. They had spent 3 hours talking. Sharing memories from before David's manipulation destroyed everything. And with each shared story, Grace had felt something inside her body growing stronger. Dr. Harrison, can I ask you something? Have you ever seen cases where emotional healing seemed to trigger physical healing? The doctor leaned back in his chair, considering the question carefully. There's certainly documented evidence of the mind-body connection. Stress can make illness worse. Positive outlook can improve outcomes. But what you're experiencing goes far beyond anything in the literature. This isn't about attitude or stress reduction. This is complete cellular regeneration happening at a speed that defies biological limitations. That afternoon, Grace met Rebecca at a small park near downtown Denver. Rebecca was sitting on a bench feeding ducks, and when she looked up, as Grace approached, her smile was radiant. "You look amazing," Rebecca said, standing to embrace her friend. "There's something different about you today. You're practically glowing." "The scans came back," Grace said. "The tumors have shrunk by more than 60%. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears of joy. "Grace, that's incredible. But somehow, I'm not surprised. I've been feeling, I don't know how to describe it, like something fundamental has shifted in the universe." They sat together on the bench, watching the ducks glide across the pond surface. Grace found herself studying Rebecca's profile, remembering the countless hours they had spent exactly like this during their teenage years, dreaming about their futures and sharing their deepest fears. "I have something to tell you," Rebecca said quietly. "Something that happened this morning during my therapy session." Grace had learned during their previous meeting that Rebecca had been in therapy consistently for 8 years, working through the trauma of David's manipulation and her own self-destructive patterns that followed. Dr. Martinez, yes, I know the name is ironic, asked me to do a guided meditation about forgiveness. Not just forgiving David, but forgiving myself. And Grace, something happened during that meditation that I can't explain. What kind of something? "I saw light," Rebecca said. "Actual light, not just imagined. It started as a tiny spark in my chest and grew until it filled my entire body. And while this was happening, I felt like I was being forgiven, not just by myself, but by something bigger, something divine." Grace felt that familiar warmth building in her chest. "I've been experiencing something similar. Every time I let go of another piece of anger toward David, toward the situation, even toward myself for not seeing the truth sooner, I feel this energy moving through my body, and my doctor says my healing is accelerating." "Grace," Rebecca said, turning to face her directly, "I think we need to consider the possibility that what's happening to us isn't just coincidence. I've been researching spiritual healing, quantum physics, the connection between consciousness and health. There's a growing body of evidence suggesting that forgiveness, especially deep, authentic forgiveness, can trigger measurable changes at the cellular level." Grace was quiet for a moment, watching a family of ducks navigate around each other with practiced grace. "Are you saying that forgiving you is what's healing my cancer?" "I think it's more complex than that. I think we're healing each other. Your forgiveness is allowing me to forgive myself, which is creating some kind of energetic loop. And somehow, that loop is producing physical healing for both of us." That evening, Grace decided to do something she'd been avoiding for weeks. She called her children. Sarah was 28 now, a successful marketing executive in Seattle. Michael was 25, finishing his medical residency in Chicago. Both had been devastated when Grace told them about her diagnosis, and she'd been putting off giving them updates because she didn't know how to explain what was happening. "Mom, you sound different," Sarah said within minutes of their conversation beginning. "Stronger somehow." "I have some news about my condition," Grace said. "The latest scans show significant improvement. The tumors are shrinking." "That's wonderful," Sarah exclaimed. "What treatment are you doing?" "I've been researching experimental therapies, and there are some promising new immunotherapy options." "Sarah, honey, I'm not doing any conventional treatment right now." There was silence on the other end of the line. "What do you mean, Mom? You can't just stop treatment. I mean, you need to be aggressive with this." Grace took a deep breath. "I've been working on some emotional healing, processing some old trauma and forgiveness issues. And somehow, That seems to be triggering physical healing. Mom, please tell me you haven't fallen for some alternative medicine scam. Cancer doesn't heal itself just because you think positive thoughts. I know how it sounds, sweetheart, but I want you to talk to Dr. Harrison yourself. Look at the scans. The medical evidence is undeniable. I'm getting better. And the only thing that's changed is that I've been working on forgiveness. When Grace called Michael, his response was more clinical but equally skeptical. As a medical resident, he understood the science behind her diagnosis, which made her claims of spontaneous healing even harder for him to accept. Mom, spontaneous remission does occur, but it's extremely rare with pancreatic cancer. Less than 1% of cases. And even when it happens, it's usually gradual, not this rapid. What you're describing sounds like something out of a medical journal case study. That's exactly what Dr. Harrison said. Michael, I need you to understand something. I'm not abandoning medical science. I'm working with my doctor, getting regular scans, monitoring everything carefully. But I'm also exploring possibilities that medical school might not have covered. Over the next week, Grace and Rebecca began meeting daily. Their conversations ranged from childhood memories to deep discussions about spirituality, forgiveness, and the nature of healing. With each meeting, both women continued to transform, not just emotionally, but physically. Rebecca's 8-year struggle with depression seemed to be lifting like a fog. Her therapist noted remarkable progress in their sessions, describing breakthrough moments that typically took years to achieve. Meanwhile, Grace's energy levels soared beyond anything she'd experienced even before her diagnosis. But the most remarkable change was in other people's responses to them. Grace noticed it first when she went grocery shopping. The cashier, a typically grumpy, elderly man she'd encountered dozens of times, suddenly smiled and struck up a friendly conversation. A crying child in the produce section stopped wailing and reached out to Grace with chubby arms, comforting himself the moment she picked him up. People are drawn to us, Rebecca observed during one of their walks through the park. Have you noticed? It's like we're radiating something that others can feel. Grace had noticed. Strangers approached them with unusual frequency, often sharing personal stories or asking for advice about their own struggles. A homeless veteran had stopped them the previous day and said, "You ladies have something special. I can see it glowing around you. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." 3 days before Grace's follow-up appointment, something extraordinary happened that would change both their lives forever. They were sitting in Rebecca's living room, looking through old photo albums from their college years, when Grace suddenly doubled over in what appeared to be severe pain. "Grace!" Rebecca cried, rushing to her side. "What's wrong? Is it the cancer?" But as Rebecca placed her hands on Grace's back, both women realized this wasn't pain. It was something else entirely. Grace was experiencing what could only be described as an energy surge, so powerful it was overwhelming her nervous system. "I can feel it," Grace gasped. "I can feel every cancer cell in my body being transformed. It's like they're remembering how to be normal cells again." Rebecca kept her hands on Grace's back, and as she did, she began to experience the same sensation. Wave after wave of healing energy moved through both women, so intense that Rebecca wondered if this was what it felt like to be struck by lightning and survive. The experience lasted exactly 11 minutes. Rebecca had been watching the clock, worried she might need to call an ambulance. When it ended, both women sat in stunned silence, feeling as if they had just witnessed something sacred. "Grace," Rebecca whispered, "look at your hands." Grace looked down and gasped. Her hands, which had been thin and pale from months of illness, looked completely normal. The skin was pink and healthy, the veins no longer prominent, the fingernails strong and clear. But more than that, both women could see a faint golden aura surrounding her hands, visible to the naked eye. "This is impossible," Grace breathed. "No," Rebecca said with quiet certainty. "This is miraculous. There's a difference." That night, Grace had the most vivid dream of her life. She was standing in a vast cathedral of light, surrounded by beings she somehow knew were angels, though they appeared as pure energy rather than winged figures. One of them stepped forward and spoke without words, the message appearing directly in her consciousness. You have chosen love over fear, forgiveness over vengeance, healing over hatred. This choice has activated the divine healing potential that exists within every human soul. Your body is remembering its original blueprint: perfect health, infinite love, eternal connection to Source. But this gift comes with responsibility. You must share this healing with others. You must teach them that forgiveness is not just emotional work. It is the key to physical, mental, and spiritual transformation. Grace woke with tears streaming down her face and the absolute certainty that her complete healing was not just possible, it was inevitable. More than that, she understood that her story was meant to be shared. That her miracle was not just for her, but for everyone who was ready to believe that love truly could conquer all. The next morning, when Dr. Harrison called with her latest blood work results, Grace was already prepared for what he would tell her. Every cancer marker in her blood had dropped to undetectable levels, according to every medical test available. Grace Williams no longer had cancer. But as she hung up the phone and looked at Rebecca, who was glowing with her own radiant health, Grace realized that the real miracle wasn't just her physical healing. It was the restoration of the most important relationship in her life, and the discovery that forgiveness wasn't just something nice to do for other people. Forgiveness, they had learned, was the most powerful healing force in the universe. 6 months later, Grace Williams stood before a packed auditorium at the University of Colorado Medical Center, telling her story to an audience of doctors, researchers, and patients who had traveled from around the world to hear about what medical journals were now calling the Colorado healing phenomenon. Ladies and gentlemen, Grace began, her voice clear and strong. I'm here today not as someone who beat cancer, but as someone who discovered that the most powerful medicine on earth isn't manufactured in laboratories. It's generated in the human heart through the practice of radical forgiveness. In the front row sat Dr. Harrison, who had become one of the leading researchers studying the connection between emotional healing and spontaneous remission. Beside him was Rebecca, now co-director of the Healing Hearts Foundation, the nonprofit organization they had established to help others experience similar transformations. The final pathology report confirmed what we already knew. Grace continued. After 6 months of complete remission with no conventional treatment whatsoever, there is no trace of cancer in my body. But what the medical reports can't capture is the journey that led to this healing. A journey that began with the hardest decision I've ever made: to forgive the person who hurt me most. Grace's eyes found Rebecca in the audience, and they shared a smile that spoke of deep friendship restored and strengthened by their shared miracle. Dr. Harrison will present the medical data in detail, but I want to share something more important: the human story behind those statistics. Because what we've discovered is that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken in our bodies. It's about remembering who we really are beneath the layers of hurt, anger, and fear that we've accumulated over our lifetimes. Grace clicked to the next slide, which showed a photo of her and Rebecca, working with their first group of participants in what they now called forgiveness immersion therapy. Over the past 6 months, Rebecca and I have worked with 47 people dealing with various forms of illness: cancer, autoimmune disorders, chronic pain, depression, PTSD. We don't promise miracle cures, because that's not how this works. But we do teach people how to access the healing potential that exists within every human being. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. Grace had learned to read rooms during her real estate career, and she could feel the mixture of skepticism and hope that filled the auditorium. Of those 47 participants, 32 have experienced measurable improvements in their conditions. 15 have achieved what their doctors classify as complete remission or recovery. But here's what's even more remarkable: 100% of our participants report significant improvements in their quality of life, their relationships, and their overall sense of well-being. Grace advanced to a slide showing testimonials from their participants. Sarah Chen, whose autoimmune arthritis had completely resolved after forgiving her abusive ex-husband, Marcus Thompson, whose PTSD symptoms vanished after he learned to forgive himself for surviving when his military unit didn't. Maria Santos, whose stage 3 breast cancer disappeared after she forgave her mother for decades of emotional abuse. We're not trying to replace conventional medicine, Grace emphasized. Every one of our participants works closely with their medical teams. What we offer is complementary, a way to address the emotional and spiritual components of illness that traditional medicine often overlooks. Dr. Alina Rodriguez, a psychiatrist from Johns Hopkins who had been studying their work, stood up during the question period. Grace, can you speak to the skeptics who might say that what you're describing is just the placebo effect or positive thinking? Grace nodded, having anticipated this question. Dr. Rodriguez, I understand the skepticism, because 6 months ago, I would have been skeptical too. But let me share something that might help address that concern. Our healing protocol doesn't involve positive thinking or visualization. In fact, it often involves experiencing very difficult emotions, grief, anger, betrayal, before moving through them to forgiveness. She clicked to the next slide, showing brain scans and blood work from several participants. What we're seeing in the laboratory data is consistent with what researchers call neuroplastic healing, actual changes in brain structure and function that occur when people process and release deep emotional trauma. Dr. Harrison's team has documented measurable changes in immune function, stress hormone levels, and inflammatory markers in our participants. Rebecca stood up from the front row and joined Grace on stage, something they had planned for this moment. If I may add something, Rebecca said, taking the microphone. I think it's important to understand that Grace and I aren't healers in the traditional sense. We don't have special powers or mystical abilities. What we have is lived experience of the transformation that becomes possible when we choose love over fear, forgiveness over resentment, and connection over isolation. Rebecca's voice grew stronger as she continued. For 15 years, I carried shame and self-hatred that literally made me sick. I struggled with depression, addiction, and a deep sense that I was fundamentally broken. The night I reached out to Grace, I was planning to end my life. I had decided that the world would be better without me in it. The audience stirred as Rebecca shared this revelation for the first time publicly. But something miraculous happened when Grace chose to forgive me, and when I learned to forgive myself. The healing that occurred wasn't just in Grace's body, it was in both of our souls. And that soul-level healing created a ripple effect that continues to transform lives 6 months later. Dr. Harrison took the stage to present the medical data, and for the next hour, the audience of medical professionals listened to documentation that challenged everything they thought they knew about the limits of human healing. Brain scans showing tumor reduction, blood work demonstrating impossible improvements in immune function, genetic testing revealing changes in gene expression associated with longevity and disease resistance. What we're documenting here, Dr. Harrison concluded, suggests that emotional healing can trigger biological changes that we previously thought were impossible. We're not claiming to understand the mechanism yet. The evidence is undeniable. Consciousness and biology are far more interconnected than mainstream medicine has acknowledged. After the presentation, Grace and Rebecca were surrounded by people wanting to share their own stories, ask questions, or simply express gratitude for offering hope where there had been none. One woman, Dr. Patricia Webb from the Mayo Clinic, approached them with tears in her eyes. "I've been an oncologist for 30 years," she said. "I've watched countless patients die despite our best treatments. What you're offering, it's not just medical hope, it's spiritual hope. I think that might be even more important." That evening, Grace sat in her backyard in Colorado Springs, looking up at stars that seemed brighter than she remembered from her childhood. Rebecca had driven down from Denver and was sitting beside her, both women reflecting on how far they had traveled from that coffee shop conversation 6 months ago. "Do you ever wonder why this happened to us?" Rebecca asked. "I mean, why were we chosen for this experience?" Grace considered the question carefully. "I don't think we were chosen. I think we chose. In that moment when I decided to write you that letter, When you decided to reach out to me despite 15 years of silence. When we both chose forgiveness over fear, that's when the miracle became possible. Grace's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her son, Michael, who had finally seen the medical evidence and experienced his mother's transformation firsthand. "Mom, I don't understand how what happened to you is medically possible, but I can't argue with the results. I love you, and I'm proud of you for following your heart instead of just following protocol." "The requests keep coming in," Rebecca said, scrolling through emails on her laptop. "Hospitals wanting us to train their staff. Cancer centers asking about incorporating our methods. People from other countries wanting to start their own Healing Hearts chapters." Grace smiled, remembering the angel in her dream who had told her that her healing came with responsibility. "I think we're going to be busy. Are you ready for that? For your life to become about teaching others what we learned." Grace thought about the question as she watched a shooting star arc across the Colorado sky. 6 months ago, she had been preparing to die. At night, she was planning how to help others truly live. "Rebecca, for 42 years, I thought my purpose was to be successful, to accumulate wealth, to build a reputation. But all of that felt meaningless when I was facing death. Now I know what I'm really here for. To prove that love is stronger than fear, that forgiveness is more powerful than hatred, and that miracles aren't supernatural events. They're natural events that happen when we align ourselves with who we really are underneath all the pain." They sat in comfortable silence to women whose friendship had been forged in betrayal, broken by manipulation, and reborn in forgiveness. Around them, the night was full of possibilities. Other people who were ready to heal. Other relationships that could be restored. Other miracles waiting to unfold. "Grace," Rebecca said softly. "Yes. Thank you for saving my life." Grace reached over and took her friend's hand, feeling that familiar warmth that now seemed as natural as breathing. "Thank you for saving mine." Above them, the stars continued their ancient dance, witnesses to another chapter in the eternal story of healing, forgiveness, and the miraculous power of love to transform everything it touches. 2 years after Grace Williams was given 3 months to live, she stood in the same hospital room where she had received her death sentence. But this time, she wasn't there as a patient. She was there as a teacher, working with Dr. Harrison to train medical professionals in what they now called integrative forgiveness therapy. The woman lying in the bed reminded Grace of herself 2 years ago, pale, frightened, angry at the world for dealing her such an unfair hand. Stage 4 ovarian cancer, 45 years old. 3 children at home wondering if their mother would live to see Christmas. "I don't believe in miracle cures," the woman said firmly when Grace introduced herself. "I believe in science, in evidence-based medicine." "This forgiveness stuff sounds like wishful thinking to me." Grace smiled, remembering her own skepticism. "Jennifer, I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm here to share my story and let you decide what resonates with you. But I will say this. 2 years ago, I was lying in a bed just like this one, with a diagnosis very similar to yours. Today, I have no cancer in my body, and the only treatment I received was learning how to forgive." Jennifer's eyes narrowed. "Forgive what?" "Forgive cancer for invading my body. Forgive God for letting this happen. Forgive my ex-husband for abandoning me right when I need support most." "Maybe all of those things," Grace said gently. "But mostly, learning to forgive yourself for being human, for being imperfect, for carrying burdens that were never yours to carry in the first place." Grace pulled out her phone and showed Jennifer a photo. Grace and Rebecca at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for their 5th Healing Hearts Center, surrounded by dozens of people whose lives had been transformed through forgiveness work. "This is Rebecca, the woman I thought had ruined my life. She's now my closest friend and business partner. This photo was taken last month at our center in Phoenix, where we've documented over 300 cases of significant healing, physical, emotional, and spiritual, through forgiveness therapy." Jennifer studied the photo, and Grace could see the first crack in her armor of cynicism. "You really believe that forgiving people can cure cancer?" "I believe that unforgiveness is toxic to our cells, our spirits, and our souls. Grace replied, I believe that carrying anger and resentment creates inflammation in our bodies that feeds disease. And I believe that when we release those toxic emotions through authentic forgiveness, we create space for our bodies to remember how to heal themselves. Grace sat down in the chair beside Jennifer's bed, the same chair where she had received her own devastating news 2 years ago. Jennifer, can I ask you something personal? Who are you angriest at right now? The question hung in the air for a long moment before Jennifer's carefully constructed composure cracked. Everyone, she whispered, tears beginning to flow. My ex-husband for leaving me when I got sick. My parents for dying before they could help me through this. My own body for betraying me. God for letting my children face losing their mother. But mostly, I'm angry at myself. For what? For not being strong enough to handle this alone. For being scared. For sometimes wishing I could just give up and let this cancer win, because fighting is so exhausting. Grace reached out and took Jennifer's hand, feeling that familiar warmth begin to flow between them. Jennifer, what if I told you that everything you just said proves how incredibly strong you are? What if I told you that acknowledging your fear and exhaustion isn't weakness? It's the beginning of healing. Over the next hour, Grace shared her complete story, the betrayal, the anger, the miraculous healing that began with a single letter of forgiveness. She showed Jennifer the medical records, the before and after scans, the documented evidence that had convinced even the most skeptical physicians. The choice is always yours, Grace concluded. You can continue fighting this battle with anger and fear as your primary weapons. Or you can try adding forgiveness and love to your arsenal. I can't promise you the same outcome I experienced. But I can promise you this. Forgiveness will change your life whether you have 3 months or 30 years left to live. As Grace prepared to leave, Jennifer called out to her. Grace, if I wanted to try this forgiveness thing, where would I start? Grace smiled and pulled out a piece of paper from her purse. The same letter she had written to Rebecca at 2:17 a.m. 2 years ago. Now laminated and carried with her everywhere as a reminder of the moment her miracle began. Start with a letter, Grace said. Write to whoever you're angriest at, your ex-husband, your parents, God, yourself, even the cancer. Don't worry about sending it. Just write down everything you're feeling. All the pain and anger and fear. And then, when you're ready, write for words that changed my life forever. I choose to forgive you. Grace left the hospital that day knowing that Jennifer would make her own choice about forgiveness. Some people weren't ready, and Grace had learned not to take that personally. Healing couldn't be forced. It could only be offered, like a gift that people were free to accept or decline. But as she drove home to Colorado Springs, Grace's phone buzzed with a text message that made her heart soar. It was from Dr. Harrison. Grace, you'll want to see Jennifer's latest blood work. Her CA-125 levels dropped 30% overnight. I don't know how to explain it medically, but something significant is happening. Grace pulled over to the side of the road and called Rebecca immediately. Another one, she said, when Rebecca answered. Jennifer is starting to heal. That makes 8 this month, Rebecca said, and Grace could hear the tears of joy in her voice. Grace, do you realize what we've become part of? We're witnessing the birth of a new understanding about healing, about the connection between love and health, about the power of forgiveness to literally transform biology. As Grace sat in her car watching the Colorado sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink, she thought about the impossible journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 years ago, she had been preparing to die. Today, she was helping others learn how to truly live. The miracle wasn't just that her cancer had disappeared. The miracle was that in learning to forgive Rebecca, she had discovered the most powerful force in the universe, love's ability to heal anything, transform everything, and create miracles that defied every limitation the human mind tried to impose on the infinite potential of the human spirit. Tonight, somewhere in the world, someone is lying awake at 2:17 a.m., carrying a burden of anger or resentment that's slowly poisoning their body, their spirit, and their soul. Someone is choosing to hold on to hurt instead of reaching for healing. Someone is letting pride stand between them and the miracle that forgiveness could create in their life. Grace Williams was that person 2 years ago. So was Rebecca Martinez. So were Jennifer, Sarah, Marcus, Maria, and hundreds of others whose lives have been transformed by the simple yet profound act of choosing love over fear, forgiveness over vengeance, healing over hatred. The question isn't whether miracles are real. Grace's medical records prove they are. The question isn't whether forgiveness can heal. The documented cases speak for themselves. The only question that matters is this: what are you choosing to hold on to that might be holding you back from the miracle that's waiting for you? Maybe it's time to write that letter. Maybe it's time to make that phone call. Maybe it's time to look in the mirror and offer yourself the forgiveness you've been withholding for years. Maybe it's time to discover that the healing you've been seeking in doctors, offices, and prescription bottles and endless treatments has been waiting for you in the one place you never thought to look: in your own heart's capacity to forgive. Your miracle is not dependent on anyone else's actions, anyone else's apologies, or anyone else's understanding. Your miracle is dependent only on your willingness to choose love, to release what no longer serves you, and to trust that forgiveness is not something you do for other people. It's something you do for yourself. Grace Williams learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting, excusing, or pretending that hurt never happened. Forgiveness is about freeing yourself from the prison of your own resentment so that your body, mind, and spirit can remember what they were always designed to do: heal, thrive, and shine with the magnificent light of your true nature. The miracle you're seeking might be just one act of forgiveness away. The healing you've been praying for might be waiting in that letter you've been afraid to write. The transformation you've been longing for might begin with 4 simple words: I choose to forgive. Your miracle is waiting. The question is, are you ready to choose it?